this week, on A Nice Cup of History, we're merging the past and the present to talk about something that is a very current issue, but using the past to try and help make sense of the hysteria. Currently, you can't turn on the TV, radio, or open the newspaper or internet news site without the latest news on the coronavirus. It's everywhere, and now we aren't going to sit here and say it's not a big issue or that we underestimate the impact it's having on the globe right now. We know people have died, and we send our deepest condolences to their family and friends. We also know people are scared, and hysteria is breaking through.
And the media has a lot to answer for in regards to that.
Absolutely. What we're focusing on today is epidemics of the past, and there have been so many, but they went away. Cures have been found, and those horrifically scary, extremely fatal diseases aren't a thing anymore. Mostly. So grab a drink. This one is going to be a doozy. So, let's get historical. We're going to begin in the past, with the plague of Justinian, and don't worry if you haven't heard of it, it isn't widely taught or spoken about nowadays. Anyway, anyone who's anyone, not just history nerds, has heard of the plague, Black Death, etc., etc. But the first great pandemic of bubonic plague was the Justinian plague of 541 CE. Named after Justinian I, the Roman Emperor of the Byzantine Empire at the time, and where people were recorded as suffering from the characteristic buboes and septicemia that we all know and love. This one originated in Ethiopia in Africa, and it spread to Pelusium in Egypt in 540, before spreading west to Alexandria, and east to Gaza, Jerusalem, and Antioch. The disease was then carried on ships on sea trading routes to both sides of the Mediterranean, arriving in Constantinople, now Istanbul, in the autumn of 541. It's really, really hard not to sing the song Istanbul then.
You did well, I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Procopius of Caesarea, a Byzantine court historian, described people who were infected as having a fever, delirium, and buboes. He wrote that the epidemic was one by which the whole human race came near to be annihilated.
Now that's a sentence, isn't it?
Yep. A number of people infected said they were becoming aware of what was coming, either through a waking vision or a dream, which could be explained by the sudden fever they would get. Some when just roused from sleep, others while walking about, and others while otherwise engaged without any regard to what they were doing. So basically you're wandering around, or you're asleep, and then all of a sudden, plague dream.
Pretty much.
Oh, damn.
Right.
The body itself showed no change from its previous colour, nor was it hot as might be expected when attacked by a raging fever. Nor indeed did any inflammation set in. It seemed so natural that not one of those who had contracted the disease expected to die from it. But on the same day in some cases, or in others on the following day, and in the rest not many days later, a bubonic swelling developed. And this took place not only in the particular part of the body which is called the bubon, that is below the abdomen, but also inside the armpits, and some cases behind the ears, and at different points on the thighs, and up in the groin area as well, which must have been incredibly painful. Same symptoms of the plagues and Black Deaths as we're taught in school.
The focal point of the Justinian pandemic was Constantinople. At its peak in the spring of 542, there was approximately 5,000 deaths per day in that city alone, although some estimates vary to 10,000 per day.
You can't fathom that, can you?
No. It went on to kill over a third of that city's population, and due to their Christian doctrine, it prevented them from disposal by cremation. And because there was way too many victims to be buried, they were stacked high in the city's churches and within the city tower walls. Over the next 3 years, plague raged through Italy, southern France, the Rhine valleys, and Iberia.
Yep.
These diseases spread as far north as Denmark and west to Ireland, then further to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Between 542 CE and 556 CE, epidemics in Asia, Africa, and Europe killed nearly 100 million people. It's a bit of an understatement to say that the pandemic had drastic effects and permanently changed the fabric of the Western world. It contributed to the demise of the Justinian reign. As well as this, food production was severely disrupted, which caused an 8-year famine. So they got over this pandemic, and then they had an 8-year famine because of it.
Yeah, because there weren't enough people farming the fields, and the food went to rot, and it's a knock-on effect, isn't it? It's never just the disease.
Yep. Further major outbreaks of this occurred throughout Europe and the Middle East over the next 200 years. In Constantinople, in the years 573 AD, 6 CE, are they the same thing?
AD is after death, C is Common Era, so yeah, they're the same thing.
Ah.
Just look for the B. B means before.
Oh, cool. Well, these are all after. So 600, 698 and 747. In Iraq, Egypt and Syria in the years 669, 683, 698, 713, 732 and 750. And Mesopotamia in 686 and 704.
So roughly there's like a 20-year, give or take, sort of time frame between them. So you've just about got time to recover a little bit, start to get your food shortage dealt with, start to get your economy a little bit back up and running, maybe another generation of the survivors, and then bam.
Yep. In 664, plague laid waste to Ireland, and in England it became known as, you're going to have to do this one, Carrie.
The Plague of Cadwallader's time.
He was a Welsh king who contracted the plague but survived it in 682.
Good man.
Yep, the plague continued in intermittent cycles in Europe, like we've just said, into the mid-8th century, and then it didn't re-emerge as a major epidemic until the 14th century, which we shall get on to later. So that's the...
Justinian plague.
Yes, one that until we started researching for this, I hadn't actually heard of that.
I knew that there was a plague around that time, I just didn't know the name of it. I know that there's plagues like going back before then. I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. But yeah,
But 100 million people died, and we didn't know that this strain of the plague existed.
Yeah, it's just known as the plague, and everyone automatically thinks the 14th century, don't they? But yeah, no, there's a lot more to it. Cholera. Let's talk about cholera. As you're drinking.
Drinking water, but it's not cholera filled.
No, rehydration's best for it.
Yep.
The first cholera pandemic was in 1817 and lasted until 1824. It's also known as the first Asiatic cholera pandemic, or Asiatic cholera. It began near the city of Calcutta and spread through Southeast Asia to the Middle East, Eastern Africa and the Mediterranean coast. While cholera itself had spread across India many times previously, this outbreak went further. It reached as far as China and the Mediterranean Sea before subsiding. Hundreds of thousands of people died as a result of this pandemic, including many British soldiers, which attracted European attention. This was the first of several cholera pandemics to sweep through Asia and Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries. This first pandemic spread over an unprecedented range of territory, affecting almost every country in Asia. And if you looked on a map, Asia's big.
Yep.
There have been 7 cholera pandemics in the past 200 years, with the 7th pandemic originating in Indonesia in 1961. Additionally, there have been many documented cholera outbreaks, such as a 1991 to 1994 outbreak in South America and, more recently, the 2016 to 2020 Yemen cholera outbreak. So it's likely this won't be the last time we hear of cholera outbreak.
No, but it's not a death sentence. Like, you think people, they know what to do now. But
yeah,
you see, it ended in 2020 and we didn't even hear of that one.
No, we didn't. Although much is known about the mechanisms behind the spread of cholera due to the fact of its pretty constant desire to pop up every now and then, this has not led to a full understanding of what makes the outbreaks happen in some places and not others. Lack of treatment and lack of treatment of drinking water generally greatly adds to its spread. Bodies of water have been found to serve as a reservoir, and seafood shipped long distances can spread the disease. So we know it's waterborne,
Yeah.
basically. So we know that much, and we can treat it. And we know, oddly enough, that even though it's waterborne, rehydration is probably the best thing for it.
Yeah.
But
Clean rehydration.
yeah,
obviously.
clean rehydration.
You can't
Treated water.
Yeah,
you can't
you
just
can't.
keep drinking from the
Yeah,
same
you
river.
can't
Yeah.
fix cholera by drinking more cholera.
No, that would not end well.
Between 1816 and 1923, the first 6 cholera pandemics occurred consecutively and continuously over time. Late in this period, particular 1878-1883, major scientific breakthroughs towards the treatment of cholera were developed. The first immunisation by Louis Pasteur, the development of the first cholera vaccine, and the identification of the bacterium Vibrio
Cholerae.
How do you just know how to say stuff?
I don't know. It's a gift.
Is it?
I'm probably saying it wrong.
By Filippino Pacini?
Yep.
And Robert Koch. After a long hiatus, the 7th cholera pandemic spread in 1961. The pandemic subsided in the 1970s, but continued on a much smaller scale, with outbreaks across the developing world to this current day. Epidemics occurred after wars, civil unrest, natural disasters, when water and food supplies became contaminated with cholera, and also due to crowded living conditions and poor sanitation, which isn't really that surprising.
No. I mean, we all know that if there's a disease spreading, one of the first things you do, don't crowd, quarantine or self-isolate, and hygiene.
Yeah, but if we go back to the first bouts of cholera, what we said before, like in India, between 1817 and 1860, the first 3 pandemics of the 19th century are estimated to have exceeded 15 million people. Another 23 million died between 1865 and 1917 during the next 3 pandemics. Cholera deaths in the Russian Empire during a similar time period, so this was mostly during like World War One and the Tsarist
Wars.
that sort of thing, revolutions, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
They exceeded 2 million in Russia alone.
Which kind of contributed to the revolutions, because that was going on, and the Tsarists were going on, and the Russo-Japanese War was going on, and the World War was going on, and the people were just fed up.
Yep.
So, that was cholera. Now on to typhus. Typhoid.
You said that really happily. You're not happy, Carrie.
Typhus! No, not happy at all. Typhus, also known as typhus fever, is a group of infectious diseases that include epidemic typhus, scrub typhus, and murine typhus. Common symptoms include fever, headache, and a rash. Typically, these begin 1 to 2 weeks after exposure. The disease is caused by a specific type of bacterial infection. Epidemic typhus is due to Rickettsia prowazekii, spread by body lice. Scrub typhus.
I do apologise for this bit.
This is going to be a lot of words, isn't it? Oh, Lord, it is. Okay. So we've got Rickettsia prowazekii, spread by body lice. Scrub typhus is due to Orientia tsutsugamushi, spread by chiggers.
We need to have a clap for that, Carrie. First time you are here reading that name off your sheet of paper, and you said it perfect. Well done.
Thank you. And murine typhus is due to Rickettsia typhi, spread by fleas. Fleas. They have a lot to answer for.
Mm-hmm.
So, with different strains, it can be difficult to predict and treat. As such, there is currently no vaccine that is commercially available. That's comforting. Prevention is by reducing exposure to the organisms that spread the disease. Treatment is with antibiotics. Epidemic typhus generally occurs in outbreaks when poor sanitary conditions and crowding are present. So, epidemic, it spreads like an epidemic. While once common, it's now quite rare. Scrub typhus occurs in Southeast Asia, Japan, and Northern Australia, whereas murine typhus occurs in tropical and subtropical areas of the world. So I think we're pretty alright in England for murine typhus.
Yeah, and like you said it was comforting there's no vaccine, but we've got all of the antibiotics now.
Typhus has been described since at least 1528 AD. The name comes from the Greek typhos, spelled T-U with a little accent, P-H-O-S, meaning hazy, describing the state of mind of those infected. Whilst typhoid means typhus-like, typhus and typhoid fever are distinct diseases caused by different types of bacteria. So you've got typhus and typhoid fever, not to be confused.
Yes, because, people confuse them all the time.
Yes.
These signs and symptoms refer to epidemic typhus, as it is the most important of the typhus group of diseases due to the amount of people who have contracted the disease, hence the use of the word epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
Signs and symptoms begin with sudden onset of fever, and other flu-like symptoms occur about 1 to 2 weeks after being infected. 5 to 9 days after symptoms have started, a rash typically begins on the trunk and spreads to the limbs. This rash eventually spreads over most of the body, excluding, randomly, the face, palms and soles of the feet.
Okay.
Other signs include sensitivity to light, so photophobia, altered mental status, so delirium, or a coma, and if left untreated, cases are often fatal.
Oh, nice.
The first reliable description of the disease appears in 1489 AD during the Sparage?
Disparage?
I read on. That's my ADHD brain, reading a little bit more of a sentence and not reading the beginning of the sentence.
Okay. Are you suffering for delirium? Do you
I
have a
am.
rash? No rash. She's fine.
I'm good for now. During the Spanish...
Spanish.
During the Spanish siege of Baza against the Moors during the War of Granada in 1482 to 1492. These accounts include descriptions of fever, red spots over the arms, back and chest, attention deficit progressing to delirium, and gangrenous sores and the associated smell of rotting flesh.
Lovely.
During the siege, the Spaniards lost 3,000 men to enemy action, but an additional 17,000 died of typhus.
With hindsight, should we have done this before we had dinner?
Yeah. In historical times, jail fever, or...
Ariotitis.
Oh, what a word.
I know.
Were common in English prisons, and is believed by modern authorities to have been typhus. It often occurs when prisoners were crowded together in dark, filthy rooms where lice spread easily. Thus, imprisonment until the next term of court was often equivalent to a death sentence. Prisoners brought before the court sometimes infected members of the court. Following some hearings held at an Oxford court in 1577, later deemed the Black Assize, which is another word for like court, trial, that thing.
Yep.
Over 300 people died from jail fever, including Sir Robert Bell, the Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer. The Black Assize of Exeter in 1586 was another notable outbreak. During the Lent inquests court held at Taunton on 1730, jail fever caused the death of the Lord Chief Baron as well as the High Sheriff, the sergeants, and hundreds of others. During a time where persons were executed for capital offences, more prisoners died from jail fever than were put to death by all public executions in the British realm. In 1759, an English authority estimated that each year a quarter of the prisoners had died from jail fever. In London, jail fever frequently broke out among the ill-kept prisoners of Newgate Prison, and then moved into the general city population. In May 1750, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Samuel Pennant, and a large number of court personnel were fatally infected in the courtroom of the Old Bailey, which adjourned Newgate Prison.
Nice. Well, at least it shows that it wasn't just a peasant thing. It was across the board, so to speak.
But again, another notable epidemic that I hardly knew anything about, and it killed a lot of people and was a major thing, especially apparently in England.
Yeah, it was massive in England, but to be honest with you, the limit of my knowledge of typhus and typhoid fever is Typhoid Mary. Who, for those of you who don't know, she's more of an urban legend than anything else, but basically she was a woman who, she was immune to typhus, but she was a carrier of it. And she used to go and work in kitchens and things and give typhus to the people where she worked. And then when it was found out that the disease was spreading, she'd then move on to another kitchen. And basically, she knew she was a carrier for typhus. Like, after about the third or fourth one, she knew. So, essentially, it's manslaughter, isn't it, effectively?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and then it did eventually catch up to her. And I can't remember if she was imprisoned or executed. I can't remember what happened. But yeah, the whole legend of Typhoid Mary it's an urban legend of basically watch what you're doing and wash your hands.
Pretty much. Isn't that what anyone is?
Yeah, more or less. Now on to the big bad.
The big one.
The big one. The boss. The chief. The Black Death.
I feel like that's all you kind of need to say. We could just skip this bit. But we won't.
No.
But just the Black Death, it carries. It's weighted.
But there's the Black Death, the Plague, the Great Plague.
But this is the Black Death of the 14th century.
Yeah. This raged from 1347 to 1352. It's notably the most taught pandemic in schools. British schools at the very least. It was the first major European outbreak of the Second Great Plague pandemic since the Justinian Plague that we spoke about earlier. In 1346, it was known in the European seaports that a plague epidemic was present in the east. In 1347, the plague was brought to the Crimea from Asia Minor by the Tartar armies of Khan Janibeg, who had laid siege to the town of Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia, in Ukraine, the Genoese trading town on the shores of the Black Sea. The siege of the Tartars was unsuccessful, and before they left, from a description by Gabriel de Mussis from Piacenza, in revenge, they catapulted over the walls of Kaffa corpses of people who had died from the Black Death. That was nice of them. In panic, the Genoese traders fled the galleys with sickness clinging to their bones.
That's a poetic sentence, isn't it?
Yeah. And they ran to Constantinople, across the Mediterranean to Messina in Sicily, where the great pandemic of Europe started. By 1348, it had reached Marseille, Paris, and Germany, then Spain, England, and Norway in 1349, and Eastern Europe in 1350. The Tartars left Kaffa and carried the plague away with them, spreading it further to Russia and India. Notably not Poland. Mainly because Poland had walls, and Poland shut their gates.
Mm-hmm.
Clever Poland. Not so clever Scotland, we'll talk about that one in a minute. The term Black Death was not used until much later in history, and in 1347 it was simply known as the pestilence or pestilentia. A description of symptoms of the plague was given by Giovanni Boccaccio in 1348 in his book Decameron, a set of tales of a group of Florentines who secluded themselves in the country to escape the plague. This is a quote from it. In men and women alike, it first betrayed itself by the emergence of certain tumours in the groin or armpits, some of which grew as large as a common apple, others as an egg, some more, some less, which the common folk called gavicciolo. From the two said parts of the body, this deadly gavicciolo soon began to propagate and spread itself in all directions indifferently, after which the form of the malady began to change, black spots or livid making their appearance in many cases on the arm or the thigh or elsewhere.
Hardcore.
One of the things as well with the Black Plague and the Black Death is that the blood would start to pool in the limbs, so your hands and your toes would turn black. Yeah. That was literally an indicator that you were close to death. You were sucking the drain at that point. The overall mortality rate varied from city to city, but in places such as Florence, up to half of the population died. The Italians called the epidemic the Mortallega Grande, the Great Mortality. People died with such rapidity that proper burial or cremation could not occur. Corpses were thrown into large pits and putrefying bodies lay in their homes and in the streets.
I bet that helped with the spread of the disease.
Just imagine the smell, though.
Ugh.
I mean, like, typical peasants in that time in the Dark Ages, the smell was not great anyway, let's be honest. But, ugh. People were as much afraid they would suffer a spiritual death as they were a physical death, since there were no clergy to perform burial rites, because they were dying too. So you couldn't get the last rites, you couldn't get a proper burial. They didn't want to burn you because that was very un-Catholic. So,
Piles and piles of people.
bring out your dead. Yeah. Ugh.
Transmission of the disease was thought to be by hazes, disease-carrying vapours emanating from corpses and putrescent matter, or from the breath of an infected or sick person. Makes sense.
Yeah, I get that.
Others thought the Black Death was punishment from God for their sins and immoral behaviour.
The tone of your voice. Punishment from God. Clearly not.
Or was due to the astrological and natural phenomena such as earthquakes, comets, and conjunctions of the planets. People turned to patron saints such as St. Roch or St. Sebastian, or to the Virgin Mary, or joined processions of flagellants whipping themselves with nail-embedded scourges and whips, and incanting hymns and prayers as they passed from town to town.
What was St. Sebastian going to do? He died, he got peppered by arrows. That's not a plague. That's a really bad accident. Sorry.
Wow, that's all fine.
Very
That's
irreverent aside there. I do apologise.
The only remedies were inhalation of aromatic vapours from flowers and herbs such as rose, aloe, thyme. Soon there was a shortage of doctors, which led to the proliferation of quacks selling useless cures and amulets.
Posies.
And other adornments that claimed to offer magical protection.
Ooh.
Of course, these did very little to protect one from the Black Death. Plague again caused great social and economic upheaval. Often whole families were wiped out and villages just abandoned. Crops could not be harvested, travelling and trade became restricted, and food and manufactured goods became short. As there was a shortage of labour, surviving villagers and village labourers were nicknamed like the villains, where they would receive extortionate wages from remaining aristocratic landowners, because they'd go up to them and be like, you've got to pay me loads of money. There's no one else who can do this job.
There's literally no one else.
So you will pay me all this money because you're screwed.
Yeah, and you don't have to pay anyone else.
Yep. And because of this, the villains prospered and they acquired land and property.
It's cool to know that's where the word comes from.
Right. The plague broke down the normal divisions between the upper and lower classes and led to the emergence of a new middle class. The plague led to the preoccupation with death, as evident from macabre works such as The Triumph of Death by Peter Bruegel the Elder in 1562, which depicted in a panoramic landscape armies of skeletons killing people of all social orders, from peasants to kings and cardinals, in a variety of macabre and cool ways.
We might put that as the image on Instagram, or we might do a plague mask. Haven't quite decided yet. But have you ever seen that painting?
No.
It's disturbing. Let's put it that way.
It sounds a little bit odd.
It's a fantastic painting. It really is a beautiful painting. But oh my god. It's macabre. It is macabre.
Yep. In the period of 1347 to 1350, the Black Death killed a quarter of the population of Europe, over 25 million people, and another 25 million in Asia and Africa. Mortality was even higher in cities such as Florence, Venice and Paris, where more than half succumbed to the plague. A second major epidemic occurred in 1361, the Pestis Secunda, in which 10 to 20% of Europe's population died on top of that.
Imaginative naming there. The Pestis Secunda, the second pest.
Yep.
Because it was a second plague.
Uh-huh.
One thing it did do, though, was because of the massive shift, most of the populations of cities were dying, and there wasn't much left out in the fields and in the farmland anymore. So there was a mass migration into cities, and that's when you first see the emergence of cities as we sort of know them now, and the emergence of a city, of a proper economy, and less focus on the land at that point. And there was a massive shift in prices of food and everything. It was a proper mess. It was a mess. The plague in the 1300s re-emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries. We won't go into too much detail as the symptoms were the same, but one difference during these centuries were the doctors, who wore a very peculiar costume to protect themselves from the plague when they attended infected patients, first illustrated in a drawing by Paulus I in 1656. They wore a protective garb head to foot with leather or oilcloth robes, leggings, gloves and hood, a wide-brimmed hat which denoted their medical profession, so basically like a ye olde hazmat suit, and a beak-like mask with glass eyes and 2 breathing nostrils which were filled with aromatic herbs and flowers to ward off the miasmas.
Yep, that's the plague doctor that you all know and love, but they weren't actually anything to do with the original Black Death.
I'm sorry, but if you were at home and you had this raging fever, you knew you were going to die, you knew there was no hope for you.
This giant bird man walks in.
I mean, there's that first moment of, are you real or are you like a fever dream? And then when you are real, what the shit are you? They avoided contact with patients by taking their pulse with a stick, because that's going to help, or issued prescriptions for aromatic herb inhalations, passing them through the door, and buboes were lanced with knives several feet long.
So not only have you got this giant bird man coming to you, he's also having a knife a few feet long, which is going to be difficult to manoeuvre, poking at very painful buboes.
A knife that is probably superheated to the point where it was red or white
and
hot.
Been used on other people, on other buboes.
And probably not clean because sterilisation was not really a thing.
No, so that's gross.
Oh, the pain. Oh, the smell. Oh.
So we're going to go a little bit forward in the past, but still in our history.
I was tempted to do a TARDIS noise, but I can't do it. So I'm not going to.
I just had the Doctor Who theme tune in my head there, and I was like, that's not the TARDIS noise. Yeah.
1918, not 1819, numerical dyslexia. It's great for a historian. Seriously. 1918.
It's my Spanish.
1918, Spanish flu. The Spanish we sound way too happy when we're saying this.
Okay, Carrie, be sad.
The Spanish influenza pandemic. I'm
I'm
trying
sorry,
to be serious.
but your voice changed so much. It was... The Spanish influenza pandemic.
I feel like we should get some sad violin music in the background.
And I'm going to click my finger, you're going to put some on. I'm making you do editing now. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Spanish influenza pandemic was from January 1918 to December 1920 and was an unusually deadly influenza pandemic. The first of the two pandemics involving H1N1 influenza virus was with the second being swine flu in 2009.
I totally had that. It was properly gross. I survived it though. That's why you couldn't move in. That's why you couldn't move in with us.
No, I remember you and Amy had it, and I saw you at the tail end of it, and you looked pretty yuck.
It wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was not great, but we survived. Luckily, we had 2 bathrooms in our house. She was downstairs, I got upstairs.
Hang on, you were right at the top of the stairs, your bedroom, and the bathroom to you was downstairs.
No, we both just died. We didn't die, obviously. We both used the living room. The 2 sofas, we had a sofa each in the living room.
Right, okay.
She would use the bathroom,
so you
which
had to
is
run
through
up
the kitchen. Mine was upstairs.
So she had to run through the kitchen where the food was kept whilst being infected. You had to run up and downstairs. So you got exercise whilst also essentially shitting yourself.
I'm pretty sure. No, you didn't get the shits with it. It was being
right, okay.
sick.
Oh, right. Okay.
Lots of vomit. But I'm pretty sure, didn't you move in and then just like disinfect everything?
Yeah.
Like all the doors are open. That massive like bottle of what was it? Dettol.
Yeah,
but with the
Dettol, because I can't stand bleach, but
the antiseptic version.
Yeah, because my mum's a nurse, and when I said that you guys had swine flu, she's like, when you move in, disinfect, and she went out and bought, and it was massive.
Yeah.
You know, like the bottles of screen wash you can get that with the big handle. There's like 6-7 litres. It was a bottle of that of Dettol, and basically there was a cap on every floor.
We didn't mean to get swine flu, but yeah, we totally survived.
But did you get it again?
No, have not had it again.
Disinfectant. Other disinfectants are available.
Mm-hmm.
So the Spanish flu, not swine flu, infected 500 million people around the world. Around the world means it's a pandemic. Mm-hmm. If it's in an area, it's an epidemic. If it goes global, it's or cross-continent, it's a pandemic. Or about 27% of the then world population of between 1.8 and 1.9 billion, including people on isolated Pacific islands and in the Arctic. The death toll is estimated to have been anywhere between 70 million to 50 million, and possibly as high as 100 million, making it one of the deadliest epidemics in human history. Infectious diseases already limited life expectancy in the early 20th century, but life expectancy in the United States dropped by about 12 years in the first year of the pandemic.
Jesus.
Most influenza outbreaks disproportionately kill the very young and the very old, with a higher survival rate for those in between. We good.
Wait.
But the Spanish flu pandemic resulted in a higher than expected mortality rate for young adults. We're not good.
There you go.
Does the year 1918 have any other historical importance then?
The end of World War One, perhaps?
It was indeed. So to maintain morale, wartime census minimised early reports of the illness and mortality in Germany, the UK, France and the United States. Papers were free to report the epidemic's effects in neutral Spain, such as the grave illness of King Alfonso XIII. Why can I read numbers easier when they're Roman numerals?
That
What
says
is
more
that?
about you.
These stories created a false impression of Spain as especially hit hard, giving rise to the pandemic's nickname, the Spanish flu.
Scientists offer several possible explanations for the high mortality rate of the 1918 influenza pandemic. Some analysis has shown the virus to be particularly deadly because it triggers a cytostorm.
Cytokine.
How read that so wrong?
I mean, yeah.
Which
I couldn't really sugarcoat that.
Yes, you did, mate. Yeah,
Sorry.
you did. Which ravages the stronger immune system of the young adults. In contrast, a 2007 analysis of medical journals from the period of the pandemic, so from 1918, found that the viral infection was no more aggressive than previous influenza strains. Instead, malnourishment, overcrowded medical camps and hospitals, poor hygiene promoted bacteria superinfection. This superinfection killed most of the victims, and typically after a somewhat prolonged deathbed. So not really very nice at all.
No, because you would have been lying in bed, you've got this raging fever, you feel sick, you feel clammy, you feel horrible, you've got bed sores, you're vomiting, it's ugh.
And you've just survived World War One.
Yep.
So, how did it spread? When an infected person sneezes or coughs, more than 500,000 virus particles can spread to those nearby.
Use a tissue.
The close quarters and massive troop movements of World War I rushed the pandemic and probably both increased transmission and increased mutation. The war may have increased the lethality of the virus as well. Some speculate the soldiers' immune systems were also weakened by malnourishment, as well as the stress of combat and chemical attacks increased their susceptibility.
It has actually been proven that when you are not necessarily depressed, but in a depressed mood, when you're tired and down, it suppresses your immune system, so you're more likely to catch things, and it's more likely to change and mutate inside you and take a hold. So, I mean, they would have had that downness, that depression, the post-combat stress, plus PTSD and other things as well.
And the lack of food and the lack of anything.
Yeah, and the horrible trench conditions.
Yeah. A large factor in the worldwide occurrence of this flu was increased travel. Modern transportation systems made it easier for soldiers, sailors and civilian travellers to spread the disease. In the United States, the disease was first observed in Haskell County, Kansas in January 1918, prompting local doctor Loring Minor to warn the US Public Health Service academic journal. On the 4th of March, which is in 1918, which is today of filming.
That's 102 years ago today.
Yep. Company cook Albert Gitchell from Haskell County reported sick at Fort Riley, an American military facility that at the time was training American troops during World War I, making him the first recorded victim of the Spanish flu.
The cook. And any kind of flu takes, I mean, you're infectious just before symptoms start to show.
So, within days, 522 men at the camp had reported sick. By the 11th of March 1918, the virus had reached Queens, New York. Failure to take preventative measures in March and April of that year was later criticised. In August 1918, a more virulent strain appeared simultaneously in Brest, France, in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and in the US in Boston, Massachusetts. The Spanish flu also spread through Ireland, carried there by returning Irish soldiers. But a bit of useful information here for you, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
The Spanish flu is what killed Edward Cullen before he was turned into a vampire in the Twilight series. Obviously not historical whatsoever, but a fun book/movie factoid for you there.
It also killed Matthew Crawley's fiancée in Downton Abbey. Lavinia Swire. Just a moment for Lavinia Swire. But Matthew and Mary got married anyway, so...
Yeah, happiness.
There are so many other historical pandemics that we could speak of. Sweating sickness, which nearly killed Anne Boleyn, and killed Henry Fitzroy as well.
Henry VIII did not have much luck with sons.
Henry VIII did not have much luck. Just full stop.
We're back.
Other strains of the plague in different corners of the globe, AIDS, HIV, but for now we're going to leave the past and jump to now. The coronavirus disease 2019, otherwise known as COVID-19, is an infectious disease caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 and is closely related to the SARS virus, which was also an epidemic when originally diagnosed. The virus is thought to have an animal origin. There has been a continuous common source of the outbreak in December 2019, which would imply that several animal-to-human zoonotic events occurred at the Huanan seafood wholesale market. The primary source of infection became human-to-human transmission in early January 2020. Those affected may develop a fever, dry cough, fatigue and shortness of breath. A sore throat, runny nose or sneezing is less common. Cases can progress to pneumonia and multi-organ failure in the most vulnerable.
Now, Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, and I do not mean any disrespect whatsoever, but doesn't that just sound like a normal cold or flu?
It does, and I think that is one of the main problems in that you've got this coronavirus out there, and it is a real problem. It is a concern, but there's going to be people who do get normal flu or normal cold.
It is also
and panic.
The beginning of March. It is also it's the month. I'd say like March and April are the months where the weather is just so unpredictable.
Yeah.
That you can get caught in rain, caught in wind, then it's sunny, then it's freezing. Your body will not handle that, and you will get the sniffles.
I mean, we've had 3 storms in as many weeks.
Yep.
There's massive flooding everywhere. You've got dirty river water running around. People are going to get infections. People are going to get colds. People are going to be miserable because at this time of year you've got seasonal affective disorder, SADS. Yep. You've got the post-Christmas blues. January's the longest month. Everyone's going back to work. Everyone's tired. They're downtrodden. you're spending most of your day indoors and then the rest of the time in darkness.
Yep.
You're going to feel low, you're going to get a cold, you're going to get a flu.
I was really, really sick over Christmas and New Year.
Yeah,
The first few weeks of January, I was really poorly.
I mean, right now, I've got a sore throat and I've got the sniffles. It's not coronavirus. It's okay. But
there will be people out there, like you, with a sore throat and the sniffles, that think they've got corona.
yeah, and the problem is it's a hysteria that's brought on by cautionary measures, because there's been a few schools around here that have been closed. And there's people that have come into contact accidentally, people that I know of. For example, someone that I know of was in a service station with a load of kids from a school trip that had just come back from Italy, and the kids were local to here, and it turns out their school was then closed, and the kids were put into isolation, and this person then fell ill, and it was just a normal cold. It was quite bad. I mean, they were quite ill, but then that automatic thought, and we joked about it. We said, "Oh, I hope you haven't got coronavirus." But the fact that there are people out there that would think that and think, "Oh my God, I've got coronavirus," and just automatically panic. And panicking is the worst thing you can do. Fear is the biggest killer in things like this.
100%.
Now, the infection is spread from one person to another via respiratory droplets produced from the airways, often through coughing or sneezing. So basically exactly the same as the cold. Time from exposure to onset of symptoms is generally between 2 to 14 days, with an average of 5 days. The standard method of diagnosis is by reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, which is RRT-PCR, from a nasopharyngeal swab or sputum sample, with results within a few hours to 2 days.
So basically, that's a spit test.
Yes, it's a posh way of saying spit
normal way is they like diagnose pneumonia and stuff.
Yeah. Antibody assays can also be used using a blood serum sample with results in a few days. Obviously, the results are now being rushed through at the moment, so they take priority. The infection can also be diagnosed from a combination of symptoms, risk factors, and a chest CT scan showing features of pneumonia.
But with that, if they're showing symptoms of pneumonia, could it just be pneumonia?
I think with that, they do the scan and see, it's pneumonia, and then do like a swab or something, just to double check. Hand washing, maintaining distance from people who are coughing, and not touching one's face with unwashed hands are measures recommended to prevent the disease. Which I genuinely can't believe people are needing to be told this. I mean, honestly. I know that supermarkets here in the UK are selling out of hand sanitizer.
Yeah, Tesco's in Kings Lynn and Morrison's and Superdrug I've seen on Facebook are completely empty. Their shelves of hand sanitizer.
Yeah, it's gone crazy. It's recommended to cover one's nose with a mouth with a tissue or a bent elbow when coughing. Again, duh. The World Health Organization, WHO, and US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, recommend those who suspect that they are carrying the virus wear a surgical face mask and seek medical advice by calling a doctor rather than directly visiting a clinic in person. Now, those surgical face masks, they are all well and good, and they do prevent the worst of it, but they prevent you breathing out it, but they don't necessarily prevent you breathing in it, because if the fibres were that thin that the droplets couldn't get in, you couldn't breathe. Masks are also recommended for those who are taking care of someone with a suspected infection, but not for the general public. Apparently masks are also selling out. There's no vaccine or specified antiviral treatment, with management involving treatment of symptoms, supportive care, and experimental measures.
Yeah, because it's a virus.
Yeah.
Bacteria is what you have antibiotics for.
Yeah.
Viruses, you just have to
wait it out.
Yep.
Yeah, wait it out and just be as healthy as you can with what you're eating, drinking, and taking in the time.
Yep. According to WHO, based on the analysis of 44,000 cases of this COVID-19 in the Hubei province, around 80% of people would have a mild form of the disease. 14% developed more severe disease, such as pneumonia.
Yep.
5% had a critical disease, and 3.7% of those cases were fatal. Now, and I cannot stress this point enough, among those who died, many had pre-existing conditions, including hypertension, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And the median time from initial symptoms to death was about 14 days, but can range from 6 to 41. So men had a death rate of 2.8%, while women had the death rate of 1.7%. Those under the age of 50, the risk of death is less than 0.5%, while in those over the age of 70, it's more like 8%. but that is because people over the age of 70 have got pre-existing conditions, the hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease.
Their immune systems aren't as strong.
Yep. No deaths have occurred with children under the age of 10 as of the 26th of Feb. And a newborn baby survived it with 0 treatment.
That must have been terrifying for the parents, though.
Yeah. But that's... I think people think they're going to die if they get it.
It's because the news, the
Yeah.
media reports
Yeah.
new case, people quarantined, people hospitalised, people dying. And you're like, yeah, okay, these people have died, but what caused it? Was it that, or was it the pneumonia that was a result of that? What was it that actually caused it?
Coronavirus just exacerbated an already... a condition they already had.
Yeah, exactly.
There-
not downplaying it at all.
Oh, no, God, no.
But, yeah, there
We
is
just-
usually an existing condition.
Yeah, we just want to try and play down some of the hysteria a
Yeah.
little bit. But there is a website that has live updates of cases and their outcomes. Not sure how okay I am with that and how that's really helping the epidemic hysteria. But for research, it's fab.
Yeah.
So, as of right now, Wednesday, the 4th of March, 2020, there have been 95,046 confirmed cases of the coronavirus.
Okay.
51,433 of those have recovered. 37,364 are still being treated. And only, and I don't say only to be detrimental or show any sort of disrespect, but only 3,249 people have died.
So in the grand scheme of things, the numbers are relatively low.
Yeah. And I say that, not like I said before, not to be coy, but because in the grand scheme of numbers, that is relatively low.
Yeah.
And again, not to be, just to say anything that coronavirus isn't important, it's not something to be worried about, but to put it into perspective, one of the worst days so far for the coronavirus was the 10th of February. On that day, 108 people in China died of the coronas. Okay?
Yeah.
But on the same day, 26,283 people died of cancer. 24,641 people died of heart disease. 4,300 people died of diabetes. And on the same day, suicide unfortunately took more lives than the virus did by 28 times. And moreover, mosquitoes kill 2,740 people every single day.
I mean, if you put it in the context of the other diseases that we've talked about, 108 people in a day, that's bad. 10,000 people in a day, I know which one I'd prefer out of the two.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like, we're not downplaying coronavirus
Not
at
no,
all.
Absolutely not.
But I just think that it's being blown out of so many proportions. My phone turned itself on.
Obviously.
So it's being blown out of proportion massively, and I'm not worried.
I'm not worried. The only time I think I will be concerned is when we learn, or if we learn, the virus mutates. Because as it is at the moment, for the most part, it's manageable, it's treatable, it's recoverable. If it mutates, we will have a different strain of the virus on our hands, and that's when things could get complicated. But there has to be a certain set of conditions for that to happen. And with the focus on it at the moment, I mean, the media are doing a bad thing by hyping it up, but at the same time, they're doing a good thing because there is a lot of focus on it now and a lot of drive to get it sorted.
Yeah, but different strains could be okay, because like we said before, swine flu is another strain of the Spanish influenza.
Yeah.
I had swine flu. I'm here.
Yeah.
At the time, so many people were worried. My sister had it too. And Mary had to have those huge tablets that were brought out because she got it just after we did.
Yeah.
So we had basically just like, we think this will work. Give it a try. We're not 100% sure. But what was it called? It
began with a T,
Yeah.
didn't it?
But they were huge. They were like horse tranquilizer tablets. So she had to have them. But yeah. And everyone thought that swine flu was going to be horrific. And now no one really talks about that anymore.
Yeah, what's the one thing you've noticed with all of these plagues? Eventually, they fizzle out.
They do.
Because those that are left develop an immunity. Now, we did say earlier about the Scottish side of the plague.
Oh, yeah.
I'll come back to that at the end. I haven't forgotten that. I just want to say I haven't forgotten about that. So, yeah, it's... I think the media does need to back off a little bit, but at the same time, considering everything that's going on with the elections over in America and with Brexit here and the turmoil of government and terrorism and things like that, the media has got a distraction. It's a distraction from all of that, and it's something that bonds us all together in potential global fear. And nothing bonds people more like fear. I mean, love, yeah. Hate, yeah. Fear, doozy.
Fair one, mate.
If you want to unite people, don't give them something to love, give them something to fear. And coronavirus right now is something to fear. God, that was
Definitely.
poignant.
That was really good.
Right, the whole thing about Scotland. Scotland did not have the plague.
Right.
Scotland was fine. They were fine up in their mountains and their fields, and everybody was fine. However,
Right.
they noticed that things were not so fine in England.
Right.
And at this time, Scotland and England were not exactly on speaking terms.
Right.
So they decided to take advantage of the weak enemy position, as you would.
Fair one.
Legged it down into England, caught the plague, decided, no, this isn't good. Ran back to Scotland. Scotland then had the plague. Yeah.
Wow.
Not the smartest. And that leads us actually quite nicely onto our regular segment, Ridiculous Death. We have already spoken on previous podcasts about the Strasbourg dancing plague. Charles II of France, who tried to cure the sweating sickness by wrapping himself in a cloth doused in alcohol that was then set alight, and the Emperor of China, who tried to make himself immortal by drinking mercury but then died of mercury poisoning. But today we are going back to 1600s France. Molière was a renowned 17th century French dramatist, actor, director and playwright. Probably a bit of a douchebag as well.
Probably.
He is best known for his comedy works in Western literature, some of which are Les Bourgeois Gentilhommes, Les Misanthropes, Les Côtes d'Enfants, and Tartuffe ou l'Imposteur. He is considered one of France's greatest playwrights, who perfectly captured the double standards of the 17th century French society, fusing both humour and intellect in his works. He was born into a fairly aristocratic family, and was educated in France's finest schools, receiving some of the finest training in theatre and fine arts. Throughout his career, he obtained the patronage of nobles such as Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, and was admired by court nobles and Parisians alike, making him one of the most loved figures of theatre. Although some of his works were directly attacked by the church, he continued to win the hearts of audiences. Today, his works are still immensely popular around the world, both in universities and on stage, where it is emulated by modern-day playwrights. Towards the end of his career, persistent illness began to take a toll on his health, which reduced his theatrical capacities. Just as his entry into the world of theatre was dramatic, so was his exit. He passed away, collapsing on the stage after one of his best performances. Ironically, the place that he was performing was called The Hypochondriac.
Yep, and he died because he was faking, inverted commas, I know you can't see, I'm doing inverted commas. He was faking a coughing fit. And
Actually
had
a coughing
fit and died.
It's not the cough that carries you off, it's the coffin they carry you off in. Have you never heard that before?
No! Say that again.
It's not the cough that carries you off, it's the coffin they carry you off in.
Ah,
Yeah.
I like that.
I can't remember where I heard that. I think I heard that from my dad, and I can't remember where he heard it. Who knows?
Wow.
Yeah. But, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Bless him.
Poor man. Anyway.
Yeah. So, thus ends this week's...
Thus ends the lesson. Sorry.
Thus ends this week's nice cup of pista tea. We will speak with you next time, and we end this by saying, please wash your hands,
Please stay safe.
cough into a tissue,
Or the crook of your arm if you don't have one, because sometimes you can be caught short without a tissue.
and don't panic.